The commitment to become a zero-carbon emission country by 2070 has positioned India as the leader of sustainable development at the World Economic Summit this year in Davos. To take this initiative forward, News18 Network has partnered with Tata Power to bring you a very special campaign, Tata Power Sustainable Is Attainable.
We're outside the India Sustainability Lounge right here at the World Economic Forum at Davos.
The lounge showcased companies and ideas that are shaping India's bold vision of sustainability into a reality.
We need to combat climate emergency that has kicked in, and that is what the lounge captures.
As part of the campaign, panel discussions were organized that brought together leaders who highlighted India's commitment towards sustainability.
The kind of work which has happened in India towards this objective is now acknowledged globally.
Even though the challenges of sustainability are many, Indian business leaders are conscious enough to take critical steps to reduce carbon emissions.
Reduce, reuse, recycle.
It's redefining how investments will flow, how new capacities will be built.
Tata Power Sustainable Is Attainable campaign amplified the message of a greener tomorrow by bringing together all the stakeholders for a collective response.
We in India have mainstreamed sustainability into our development agenda.
And as we all know, green growth, green infrastructure leads to that many more jobs.
The core message of the campaign is resounding deeply with the change makers of today, and that is helping pave the way for a greener tomorrow.
The future is sustainable.
It is attainable.
Sustainability is attainable.
Tata Power presents Sustainable Is Attainable, an initiative by News18 Network.
India's commitment to achieve net zero emissions by 2070 is poised to lead the nation towards a path of clean, green and sustainable development. Now, to take this initiative forward, Network 18 has partnered with Tata Power to bring you a very special campaign, Tata Power Sustainable Is Attainable. And this is really aimed at building awareness, driving conversations with industry, policy makers and civil society leaders on how India can really lead the path towards sustainable development. Now, we are joined by two very special guests to drive conversations and ideas, Mr. Deepak Bagla, the MD and CEO of Invest India, as well as Mohammad Atar from PwC. Thank you very much for joining us for this Network 18 special. Mr. Bagla, if I can start with you, India has a very ambitious mission to achieve net zero emissions by 2070. What steps are we taking towards those? And a lot of people are counting on India, a lot of attention on India this year because of the G20 presidency. So if you can tell us about the initiative.
And then if you notice, even on the promenade at Davos, we are probably the only country which has a special lounge only devoted to sustainability. The fact is, it is one of those core values which has been completely stressed upon by the Honorable Prime Minister. And if you really look at it, one of the things which has been going on is that the kind of work which has happened in India towards this objective is now acknowledged globally. And I wouldn't be surprised that if you're looking at the first green industrial revolution in the world, it's going to be happening in India at the pace at which we are industrializing. But let me share with you a very recent study which was done by JETRO in Japan. And this was just in November of last year. 7,000 odd companies from Oceania and the Pacific and Asia were interviewed. India was number one in efforts towards decarbonization, if I may just read that for you. From my entire peer group, which included Indonesia, China, Vietnam, and the other countries, India was rated by these companies as number one in the world. See, the interesting thing about sustainability, one is policy, one is what is a value which a society and the polity has. And that is also which drives policy. So India, even as it's also a lifestyle and a mindset. And it's all working towards sustainability. So with that, if you look at it, when we are looking at 45% carbon emission intensity to be reduced by 2030 in the next 7 to 8 years, and 1 billion ton of carbon emission reduction by 2030 again, that's again a big number. And even if you look at some of our earlier commitments, the other thing which is now getting very well acknowledged is when the leadership in India today makes a commitment, they deliver on that commitment. And in each of these commitments, we'll be looking at about a 50% renewable energy share by 2030. Now, that's a big one. And we'll be looking the kind of 500 gigawatts of non-fossil energy which needs to be created as new capacity in the next 8 to 9 years. And we are already on the run rate to be able to do that much before.
Yeah.
So the good thing is, there is a value which has been instilled by the leadership from top down. There is a focus, and there's an entire effort which is working towards it. And the other good thing is, the world today is acknowledging the effort which is happening in this direction.
If you can weigh in, I read somewhere that India is already the third largest producer of renewable energy in the world. And I saw a data point that said 40% of our installed electricity capacity is already coming from non-fossil fuel sources. So if you can tell us about the role that India can play, what kind of, how can we build on this lead that we have in terms of sustainable development going forward?
Absolutely, Chitra. If you see, as India is committed to its net zero transition by 2070, there are three principal constituents to carbon dioxide emissions. Energy is the topmost contributor, followed by manufacturing and transport. These three are the principal constituents to the carbon dioxide emission. Now let me zero on the transport commitment India has made. 13% of our total carbon dioxide emission comes from mobility. And in our sustainable development goals, sustainable mobility will also play a very important role. Now, in our country, which is envisaged to grow between 7 to 7.5% over the next 10, 15 years, everything which we are seeing will multiply over a 2x, 3x. And so is the carbon dioxide emission from mobility that will also, increase to 3.3 times by 2030. And that's where the role on electric mobility, where India has done a fantastic job, phenomenal job in transitioning, and creating like a movement to move diesel vehicles towards electric vehicle. But the challenge around that will still remain is how much are we having capacity on the financing side, because India is all about numbers. If we want 1.3 million vehicles to be electric by 2030, is there enough source of capital to enable that transition? And that's what something would drive India's pace at which it moves towards mobility. So that's what would be critical to the success.
You spoke very important point, which was about the availability of capital. But what needs to be looked at what is happening in India is the huge amount of innovation which is happening in this space. From reduce, reuse, recycle, on all these three elements. In fact, if I would say I have today more than 7,000 startups in India, and this is probably one of my biggest segments of the entire startup community. What is happening on the startup and innovation side? The ability to do more at far less.
Absolutely.
And that, I think, is where, even with the capital constraints, if there are any, though I don't think there would be any capital constraint in some things like this which are moving on so successfully, because they are still creating good bottom lines because of the scale which we operate on. But still, our ability to deliver far more of every rupee which is spent in India, and especially in this area. And to add to that, my earlier point, it's a mindset. Sustainability is a mindset. Look at our homes and the way we all work in it. Reduce, reuse, recycle. And it works so well in our context.
In fact, my follow-up question was on sustainable financing. What kind of role can that play in meeting SDGs?
See, if you think about, sources of capital, and right now, the first thing we need to do to enable sustainable finance to move to our country is to have a very clear framework of defining what would be called as green finance and what will not be called as green finance. For example, if you look at multilaterals, which are kind of promoting financing in India, for public transport, MRTS project is a very clear source for, attracting a lot of green finance over there. Or if you think about electric mobility, whether it's in the form of public transport, whether it's buses, or whether it's in the form of, last mile connectivity, specifically logistics plays a very important role in this. And that's another place where we can attract a lot of sustainable finance. What we really need to do is create a very clear, policy and regulatory framework for these sources of capital. There are global funds that are available for money to be channelized. And then they need to clearly see that as we are creating these project reports, as we are creating these DPRs to attract this sustainable finance, are there elements which they are looking out for to channelize their money. And if that's done and that standardization is done, India will be able to channelize a lot of, sustainable finance for these initiatives. Now, one more thing I'll tell you, even on the manufacturing side, if you see recently, a lot of governments, state governments have started coming out with an additional policy incentive if the source of power is renewable. So what they're doing is, they said fundamentally earlier we used to give incentives for investments, incentives for jobs, and now they're saying incentives for being green. And that's a fantastic, new way of promoting, much more greener way of manufacturing. And accordingly, as these elements get built into the project, you can attract a lot of sustainable or green finance to these projects.
Ms. Pagla, would you want to add to that, sir?
There's been a huge change in the mindset after the pandemic, which we've all gone through. It was brutal. I think sustainability has come to center of the plate. It's no longer a choice, it's an imperative. Both for you as an entity, as an individual, for a society, for a corporate entity, and for us as a nation state. And one interesting element, Mohammed, which is picking up from what you said, is, so one, there is a portal being created where all the countries are going to put in their projects, which are going to be looking for capital. But more interestingly, to your point, there's going to be an independent third-party agency which will start rating those projects on sustainability. So this is what the investors are looking for, as Mohammed very rightfully said so. And they need that direction to flow their capital in. And with these ratings which are going to be coming out, I think it will be far easier for everybody to realize which is the direction they want to get their capital invested.
The role that the power and utility sector can play in driving sustainability.
I look at India as one of the leaders in that endeavor going forward. And obviously the energy companies have a big role to play in it, both because they have deep pockets and also because they are right at the heart of the sustainability.
So Bagla, when I speak to companies like Bharat Forge or Tata Steel and the others, there's a lot of focus now on green steel, decarbonization, and you already mentioned mobility. In fact, India is becoming a powerhouse when it comes to EVs. If you look at the strides that an Ola or a Hero have made. So can you tell us how the industry is looking at sustainability, how India Inc. is looking at sustainability? Because as you said, sustainability is not a choice but an imperative. So is this front and center as far as their business goals are concerned, when you spoke to them, when you interacted with them here at Davos?
I think each one of them is looking at it, but look at it from the other perspective. When we discussed how there's a change in mindset where now it has become an imperative, the moment anything impacts your PE, your price earning value, is what actually is going to create and determine the kind of actions which a corporate entity is going to take on it.
Absolutely.
And we are now at that point where PEs are going to get impacted and good citizenship.
Because there is an ESG premium.
Which is already started.
Absolutely.
Both in terms of financing and both in terms of valuation by an entity like anybody else.
In fact, there are sovereign funds that invest in companies that are ESG compliant.
Absolutely.
So there were startups that had to become ESG compliant in order to attract sovereign funds. So as Mr. Bhagat said, it ultimately comes down to the bottom line. If it's going to help you make money.
And it is. So for example, I was on in a panel where we had people from Lego and Hewlett Packard, and they talked about how refurbishment is becoming central to their business. It's not even recycling. One last point I also want to take as another dimension of sustainability. See, because you were talking about mobility and why mobility is such an attractive sector for sustainability, there are other dimensions of sustainability. We have to make our transport accessible. And then public transport will play a very important role in making the transport accessible. The developed economies around the world, 85% of the people have access to public transport. In developing economies, that number goes down to between 40 to 45%. And as public transport will become more accessible in these transitioning economies, much more of this sustainable investments will happen in promoting either EV buses, in promoting more LRTs, MRTs, and that's where this whole attraction for Indian market will continue. So sustainable development goals will be about one which is the carbon dioxide emission, but it is also about accessibility, affordability, and even safety of people. And that's the broader narrative with which we should see sustainability as one element, thinking about, let's say, transport as an area.
Mr. Bagla, I also wanted to get your thoughts on the role that the power and utility sector can play in driving sustainability. There has been a lot of discussion around green hydrogen in the last year. Corporations are making massive investments in this area. How is that going to help, in terms of energy transition?
Look at what India has done. We're probably one of the first few countries in the world which has actually created not just a policy, but an entire set of a roadmap on how we're going to take it on where green hydrogen is concerned. And I think it has been very clearly stated by the Prime Minister that that's where we are headed. I look at India as one of the leaders in that endeavor going forward. And obviously the energy companies have a big role to play in it, both because they have deep pockets and also because they are right at the heart of the sustainability story. And we've also heard what Mohammed said. But I'll tell you the other interesting thing about sustainability. Look at this lounge. From the writing instrument to the water bottle to the towel which you will use in a tissue, it's all born through sustainability. So it is more in the mind. And the thing about India and as a society is that it's a mindset which is totally focused on sustainability. So it's from the small to Mohammed's EVs to the big energy companies which you mentioned.
How many EVs do you own since he said Mohammed's EVs?
I started with a two-wheeler. that was fun.
Is there a Tesla in your garage?
We hope first it comes to India and then we probably can think about that in our garage. But it's also about reducing...
But you should have a made in India car in your garage.
No, but another question I want to put it on the panel is sustainability is also not about finding sustainable sources and then we create products. Sustainability is also about reducing consumption. So maybe the right question is that do you walk to work or are you using a car? So because then that's a much...
Do you walk to work or are you using a car?
Yeah, so I walk to a metro station in Gurgaon and then from there I go to office like that because it's much easier and faster.
So he's walking the talk with respect
Absolutely,
to public
that's
transport.
the way.
But Mr. Bagla, what you said was very interesting on how every aspect of the lounge, the sustainability lounge, you've thought through in terms of reusing, recycling. I noticed something very interesting. Even the pens available in the India lounge, they're made of recyclable material. And there are seeds of plants. I don't know if you noticed this, but there were radish seeds and carrot seeds at the tip. That's an amazing way to, drive that message that you can literally plant your pens after using them and it become, that's an amazing way of looking at it.
These are our amazing startups, Linda. That's from one of them. And, starting from the paint to the material which is used in this lounge, everything is sustainable. And it's not just here. You've seen these pens. Recycling of the flowers, which are all from the temples. We have amazing startups which are coming up with some phenomenal solutions and creating this sense of sustainability all around us.
So, a follow-up to that, what kind of innovations are you most excited about when it comes to sustainability?
For me, the most exciting ones are where they pick up things which we are doing in our daily lives and creating a sense of sustainability around it. And then obviously are the big solutions which are coming in, which have dramatic impact. So these are the incremental ones which add up. And those are the big ones which descend on you and have a huge setup.
What about you?
You will see a huge innovation coming in the manufacturing sector. For example, circular economy will become central. So you will see a lot of innovation in the choice of product. There will be a lot of reverse logistics innovation that will happen to say that once it's consumed, how it is recycled. And, you will have right from production processes changing to the distribution channels changing and the choice of those mobility, solutions or the way technology is being brought in. We are set for a lot of innovation in these sectors.
Right. Closing message, sir, for our initiative on how the future is sustainable and sustainable is attainable. If you have a message for our viewers.
The Prime Minister has set a goal. That goal will be accomplished. India will be known and acknowledged, which it currently already is, as one of the most sustainable nations in the world, and for a green industrial revolution for the first time in human history.
On that note, thank you very much for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you.